stage hype's over at this point, and I'm not all too sure these showcase videos have even done much for anyone, but I got one promise left to fulfill before I retire the format for a while. Phil Rocco's Mock Adventure / Around the World / Around the Mind is, if anything, a fitting final boss for this review analysis series because, honestly, this is one of the most out there games I've played in quite a while. The wild 4-year development history that's produced a total of 1.5-ish playable levels doesn't make organizing my thoughts any easier. But let's jump in anyway. Normally, we'd start with basic gameplay. This one, though, it's built a bit different. The game cold opens on a very well-produced cinematic of a spaced-out girl coming to her senses in line. This section is, of all things, a glorified keybind menu wherein the office's ceiling-mounted TVs prompt you to set your walk-in and interaction controls. All the while, these snazzy dialogue balloons present a very cryptic backstory of you and the guy behind you in line having worked here before. The desk lady asks you about a project you were working on before booting you suddenly into a completely different world space. You are now a blue man using to navigate Super Paper Mario. Halfway through the level, you pick up a water gun, which is used to clear the path ahead by slowly dissolving these wooden crates. No, I'm not skipping anything here. There's no further context on how you got here, and aside from falling into pits, there are no real hazards or challenges to overcome either. The section comes out of nowhere, does very little, and ends as abruptly as it began, finally dumping you out into what I describe as the main gameplay style. It resembles what the game was the last time I played it anyway. Here, you control a therapist, who's also a child, that I'm at least assuming is still named Mike. This is starting to sound like stream of consciousness, but I can only assume that's the point. And there's definitely a charm to it. Around the Mind captures this really surreal and dreamlike quality, and it pulls it off without devolving into all-random humor or forced absurdity. Everything about it's effortlessly arbitrary. It's kinda smart in that way, assuming I'm not just reading too much into it. Anyway, though, the main gameplay. It's all around standard fare, to an almost surprising degree, though unlike the previous two games I've reviewed, this one is very fast-paced and loose. Mike's got good speed and tight acceleration with a jump arc that feels just about right. A notable feature of the jump is that it's basically just a charge that replenishes whenever you land on the ground and can be used even mid-air, assuming you didn't get there by pressing jump initially, that is. Yeah, it works like in Devlog of all games, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It works here, and it even comes in handy sometimes. The main mechanic here, though, is a chargeable air dash. Like I said, pretty standard stuff, though it's functional and fun, and the game ain't exactly starving for novelty, so I'll let it slide. This dash sort of functions as a glide as well, not blazingly fast, but it has good reach, and by holding up, or W, you can make it ascend over time. Yeah, that's right, it's still WASD to move, but now jump is I and dash is U. Around the Mind does as it pleases. It's a game of its whim, and you can't help but respect it. Well, if you can help but respect it, it might not be for you, but we'll get to that. What makes that particular maneuver interesting is the previously mentioned jump storage mechanic. The dash gives you basically two separate double jump mechanics, depending which order you perform the actions in. A fully upward dash gives you far more height than a normal jump, whereas a diagonal upwards dash gives you about the same vertical coverage. Overall, there's a lot of hidden depth here. What's not quite so impressive is the enemy roster. To be more precise, there's only one enemy type, and it doesn't do much. In fact, it doesn't do anything. You die if you run into it and defeat it by jumping on it. Surprisingly enough, the dash does not work on it, despite being used to break crates. There's technically a second type, which is just the same stationary enemy with spikes on its head, but at that point it's not really an enemy. It functions identically to the spike types littered throughout the level. Oh yeah, forgot to write it in the script, but this is a one-hit kill game, so yeah, be careful with that. More developed though it is, it's still not long before the segment ends and boots you to the overworld. Yeah, there's an RPG-style overworld too. Not a ton to do here, a few cameos from other Sage projects, including Super Freaks and Voyage, a half-finished level, a 1/100th finished level, and a few challenge variants for the first level located in this building off to the side. This is basically the end of the gameplay segment, so I may as well go over the 3 challenges, because the other 2 levels ain't really nothing. Number 1 is to win without collecting any coins. It's fun and challenging, but unfortunately making the jump to this platform here always crashes my game. Oh well, at least now I know for sure he's still named Mike. The second challenge is a bit more interesting. You only get to use your dash, which is called a hydro for some reason, once. What makes it interesting is that you do get to use it one time, meaning that instead of a perfectionist challenge, it's a bit more strategic. You decide the most optimal place to use it for yourself. This almost feels like a soft tutorial to get you looking deeper into the base mechanic on your own, and I am really digging that. The third challenge is find the secret route. I couldn't find the secret route, sorry, but it's good to know they exist. I'm a huge fan of how these simple challenge conditions are used to highlight more obscure aspects of the game. It's a good sign that, even as muddled as the game's current state is, there's some really strong design sense behind it. Now heck, this video could do with more padding, so here's a brief summary of the two unfinished levels. Bliss is a half-finished Windows XP desktop that introduces springboards. They're sort of janky and don't always want to bounce you at their full height. It might be that how high you bounce off them depends on how fast you fall onto them, but something about the animation makes them feel off. Like they spring up too high and fast for how low they launch you. The third and final level, Stuck in a Loop, is just one platform. There's a pencil up at the top that moves left and right, spawning enemy dinosaurs. When it spawns them on the left, they zip off screen. When it spawns them on the right, they float in midair briefly before disappearing. Bipartisan politics, am I right? Am I absolutely straining to make it sound like I have anything to say about this game outside level 1? Yes I am. Presentation-wise, Round the Mind is a mixed bag. The artwork here is fine, aside from these clearly very early overworld tiles. Animation is passable but minimal, character designs are the same really, nothing ugly, but nothing jumps off the screen at you either. Is it a bit too safe in that regard? All I can really say for sure is that the aesthetic feels a bit dated and not in the same how you remember it way as Super Freaks. The Rainy City level, called Between Dimensions, yeah, no context there either, looks pretty nice, displaying a decent understanding of mood settings, so it's not all boring. Where things pick up more dramatically is in the presentation itself. You already saw the cinematic intro, and a lot of small things, the text bubbles, the exploding debris when you break robots, the ghostly TV person warping you in and out of levels and back to checkpoints are either quite impressive, or at least nice attention to detail. For that I can't quite knock the visuals, but I can only praise them so far. Music is once again where this game really shines. It's all original, but oozes with what I'm going to call that blind browsing VGmusic.com vibe. The best way to describe it is, it sounds like brewed in late 2000s MIDI remixes of early 90s JRPG music. Now that's how you do a retro game maker soundtrack. Add an alternate soundtrack that's exactly the same, but with the Super Mario World sound font, and it's perfect. Now, story? The previous two reviews featured incredibly basic stories that were hardly worth mentioning, but Round the Mind's demo is different, in that it seems to promise the start of something unique and interesting, but nothing really happens. Obviously, it's very early in development, but it kind of feels like the opening just stops right before it drops the hook. If I were Phil, I would have developed this part a bit further, even at the expense of delaying work on some of the content. Half finished is about as far as anything outside the first mic level gets anyway, so something to consider for next time, I guess. Round the Mind is easily the hardest, and hardly the easiest, game I've had to review for this series, and that extends even to the final verdict. It's good? Like I said, it's a game of its own whim, and you're either here for its bull hockey or you're not. If you just want another air-dash platformer to briefly fill the void in your heart, you could do better and you could do worse. There's a bit of digging and wading on the way to a tiny morsel of that action. If you are here for the weirdness though, it's got a unique brand for sure and it doesn't do it badly. Final score? This is a bit different, but I'm going to give Round the Mind a 6 to 8 out of 10, depending what you want from it. My personal score is another 7.5, because at the least it's not really a lesser game than Voyage, but objectively speaking it's full of less developed novelty concepts that cut into the meat of it. Well, that's all for now, and that's all for this Sage, unless I pick up another game out of the blue. I honestly wish I had more design analysis to give, but as I hope I've made clear, the game's kinda all over the place. The only things I could really latch on and dig into were the dash mechanics, because everything else is either too standard to say much on, or over as soon as it starts. Not certain what I'll talk about next, now that this brief mini-series is over. There are a lot of topics floating around the mind, so the only promise I can really leave you off on is, talk at you later.